opposite direction. And that's why we had those incredible colors this evening. Or I could have just said, red sky at night. Sailors, you know what they say, maybe it's a good sign. Relatively speaking, folks, and of course it's all relative when we're talking about a monster like this. Category 3 hurricane, probably unfortunately going to become a Category 4 with winds of over 140 just before going ashore. Southwest coast of Florida, generally speaking. If you know the southwest coast, maybe we're going to find out the worst of the storm surge, a place called Port Charlotte. They might get up to a 15-foot storm surge, and of course then they're going to have those winds of over 140. We'll see exactly where that occurs. With that said, remember, we've talked about, even if you don't have the numbers, remember symmetry indicates strengthening, and certainly this is symmetrical. But let's look a little bit closer. Do you notice how this side initially, you see, we call that outflow. And notice in the last couple of frames how it almost becomes straight here. That's drier air coming into the system. Now, it's just beginning, but it's the sign we do want to see. Here's another way to look at it. Here's the high, here's the front. This is the front that caused the hurricane to be turned north around the high because this front kept the high from building westward. But this front also is what brought very dry air down to the southeast. Right now, we have dew points in some spots in the 50s. That is dry air. And because, and this sounds counterintuitive, because of the strength of the hurricane, it's drawing, because of the strong northerly winds on its west side, right? It's drawing dry air into the system. And eventually, and this model indicates it, we call this a dry slot, starts getting wrapped around it. And notice eventually, and this is just a computer model presentation, but I think it's doing a pretty good job, this would be the core, but because of so much dry air, then no longer do we even have an eye wall. That northeast quadrant is still impacting us, but that's why this system is going to weaken, not just because it's going to be crossing the state from southwest to northeast, but it looks with increasing confidence that dry air is going to be drawn in toward it, chokes it off. Now, I think it's obvious it won't have moisture, but remember, evaporation causes cooling, and these are heat engines. So any layer that starts to cool will weaken the hurricane in a pretty big way. All right, so with all that said, we're sticking pretty close to what we've had on the Big Three for the last couple of days. The worst of the weather Wednesday through Friday, but we're really focused on that combination. Yes, the winds will be a big deal, but the highest concern of threat is the combination of the heavy rains and of 6 to 14 inches and the high tides. So let's talk about the high tides, but after comparing it to Irma, because so many of us know Irma. The St. John's, the intracoastal, the estuaries, and I'm talking about from St. Augustine all the way up to St. Simons Island, came up 5.5 feet. Ian's going to come up about 4 feet. 18 inches maybe doesn't sound like a big deal. I think it will end up being a big deal. For tomorrow, the rain gradually comes up from the south, and that rain will become heavier and it will become windier before the system begins to head off toward the northeast. Remember, we're going to be watching the tides. I'm not concerned about tonight's high tide. It's tomorrow night's high tide, and then we'll have at least 3, maybe 4 critical high tides as we go through Thursday and then Friday. That's when the biggest concern will be, Thursday and then Friday. If things go with the current forecast, conditions will be improving dramatically from south to north on Friday and then certainly into the weekend.